Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Joris Cuesta. Joris, welcome.
Thank you. How are you today?
I'm good. What about yourself?
Not too bad, indeed.
Good. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, let's go ahead. A bit about myself. I'm a European transplant to Sydney, Australia, and I escaped the corporate rat race, which nearly got me twice with two beautiful burnout, coming to the realization that I had more to offer in supporting teams and leaders into different type of leadership. So I now support leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, and their team into connecting better, working with each other, and really aligning the people with the right, let's say, purpose or end goal of any organization, small, medium, or large.
Okay, well, thank you for that. As I said before we started recording, I've done a little bit of research on you, and the first question, I mean, I'm not sure whether you'd call it an icebreaker necessarily, but I kind of like it. Because you've got a little quiz on your website, and the first question for you is, what famous leader are you?
Oh, me. I am the Oprah Winfrey type leader.
Oprah Winfrey?
What? Hold up.
Yeah, that's on the quiz. That's who I came out at. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it is interesting because a few years ago, I was definitely not the Oprah Winfrey type. That is for sure. But I do make that it's more into working towards something much bigger, bringing people along the way, and always reminding myself and the people around me about what we're here trying to achieve. So whenever a curveball is thrown our ways, or where someone is thinking differently, or a new idea thrown on the table, it's more, instead of just reacting or rejecting it or being triggered by things, it's more about, well, does this really truly align and coming in service with what we're trying to achieve here? And if it is, then let's get it on board, even if that wasn't part of the plan. So that is a new way of leading for me, definitely.
And who would you say you have been previously?
100%. I used to be the Apple founder, Steve Jobs.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste. Most of them were bozos.
I used to be a perfectionist to no end. I used to be the guy that had the big thinking picture in its mind while holding the minute details in mind as well. And if the team was not executing the exact same way that I had envisioned that to happen in my mind, at times, it would have been a very tough day in the office for the teams. And apart from that, it was also taking way too much on board and be a people pleaser, which as a combination, can be quite explosive. So very loved, but also very hated at the same time, and burning way too much energy for what we're here on earth to do. So I'm happy that's part of the past now.
Well, in terms of character, that's quite a big change from one to another. So what happened there?
I basically collected burnouts. It's very fashionable, everyone to have its own burnout, but I didn't go for one. I went for two, probably another one, which, I didn't really identify as such. But I think after the second one, which was quite heavy, I started thinking there has to be a different way. Because on one hand, the work is amazing, people love it, I'm enjoying it, but there is too much of that friction at times. There is too much of disappointment from my team and people, because obviously I had my own expectation, which I was projecting on them, and I was wanting them to live their life according to their relationship with work the same way I was, which is mad to some extent. So I started thinking something has to give, and I had a couple of clients and other leaders I was working with at the time that were mentioning taking time out, going out on retreat. And for a very long time, we have Bali as an island very close to Australia. And a lot of British people, or POMs as they call it, you go there for, enjoying the party side of the island. And I never took or pay attention to much to it. But there's a whole different side to the island where you can go for retreat, silent retreat, spiritual retreat, whatever it may be, a vegan retreat. And I started to explore, and within the span of 48 hours, 4 different people had recommended me a hotel, a center, a couple of meditation teacher, and also spirit healer, as they call it, or guide. And off I went. I just left and went on the island, and a 7-day trip turned out to be a 23-day trip. And I had my first yoga class, meditation class there. And that was the biggest turn in my whole life in terms of approaching life, looking at things and behaving either to events or individuals around me.
That's interesting, because I mean, I want to ask you 2 different questions. One of which is like, do the old habits ever come back? Does the Steve Jobs approach ever come back, sneak in to your daily life? And the other one, or the other topic I wanted to highlight was, there's very few things I find that make permanent change in your life. And this, it seems like it has made a permanent change in your life, and like a significant event for you. Would you say that's true?
Oh, 100%. There has been events in terms for your second part of the question. There has been ongoing events since, relationship that have healed, contract that have come about that would have never ever happened in my previous life, as I call it. I think also once you had a taste of this new way of walking through life, I mean, I certainly know that there is no need or appetite to go back to where I was. It was I was polluted, I wasn't necessarily happy, I was feeling quite empty, and it was an empty, ever-going pursuit, because it was never good enough. It was never big enough. It was never busy enough. I was never showing up fully. So I was really racing after something that really was a never-ending wheel, trying to fill it in, a big void, as you call it. But the first part of your question, remind me now, because I think I just want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Well, it's about do the Steve Jobs characteristics ever sneak back in?
Correct. Hopefully not, but they do at times, and it's an ongoing work. So you will feel it creep in. More so, I think, in regards to individuals or relationship where you haven't really done the work. But when it comes from a professional perspective, it doesn't. When it does, it always comes because you have a lesson to learn from it. So very, very early on, when I then started, so after the Bali years, and I traveled the world a bit and went to the US, then ended up at Stanford University, completely out of luck, yet I had applied for it, but I've forgotten about it as part of professional development. And all the pieces started coming together. But there was one particular event where I started to consulting organization and become a speaker. I walked on stage, and I think I walked on stage with more of the Steve Jobs than the new Joris. And it meant that for part of the people in the room, we really met halfway with a huge bang. It was too much for them. So that had instant repercussion, and life kind of sent me a feedback saying, probably not the best way. And I've learned a big lesson, which is you've got to read the room and meet people where they're at, stretch them enough so they can expand and grow, but don't stretch them too much, because then they turn around, they don't pay attention anymore, and they're not coming on the journey, on the way. So I think each time the old habits creep in, it's an opportunity for us to grow, really.
It reminds me of, have you ever seen, it's an old film now, have you ever seen the film where Keanu Reeves plays the Buddha?
No.
Well, he's doing this meditation type retreat where he's, I don't want to give spoilers, but it's an old film, so I'll do it.
Yeah.
And he's like eating, I think it's something along the lines of 1 grain of rice per day or something like that, and meditating all the time. And then he sees this guy playing a guitar, I think it is, and he is tuning the guitar. So he's kind of like, and the string snaps, And the lesson he learns from that is if you stretch it too far, the string's going to snap, and the metaphor is for obviously individuals. Just makes me think.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I've lived through it. But don't get me wrong. Between the event of me walking on stage, getting the feedback, and having triggered a lot of people at senior level, to then understand what that meant and how I had to show up to better, that took probably 4 to 5 months, because at the beginning I was upset at me, upset at them. You go through all scenarios. So it's not as if suddenly you know everything and you turn up and you're the best version of yourself 24/7. It takes time. Time is needed, really.
And you said that, correct me if I'm wrong, you felt like you were filling a void initially. Have you ever done some self-awareness on why that might be?
Oh yeah, 100%. I grew up in a family where my parents were playing sport at quite a high level back home in their respective fields. So there was an understanding that I would come and do the same, but I had a big back injury, and that was not the case. So I felt as if I probably already, not lived up to the expectation of both of my parents to begin with. And then the household was extremely strict, rigid, regimented. They were quite successful in their own right, but there was a certain sequence of how things had to happen, and how you had a conversation, sit at the table, the whole gamut of life. And the expectations were pretty high now that I've traveled the world and seen a lot of other family and people. And I think it came from that, where you always had to do more. More was expected. And one of the imprints or way of understanding life, so to speak, which wasn't mine, it was my parents. It was that you must work hard to be successful. So I've made my early part of life in corporate hell, because if there was a straightest path to success for anything, I would take the harder one. So everything was much harder, because for me, if it wasn't hard enough, well, it wasn't really meant to be, and I should not really have, the pay package that go with it, and the applaud or the thanks from clients or whatever it may be. So yeah, that was the void.
And I saw that on the website that you had to relearn how to walk in your 20s. Was that the back injury you were referring to?
Correct. Yeah. So from a very young age, I had basically the top of the femur and the bottom of the hip was not really fully or regularly irrigated by blood. So that meant that the bone didn't grow in a proper way. So there was a lot of friction between the two bones, which was preventing me from doing sports, giving me a lot of fever at times, and I could not stand properly. Now, the surgeons and everyone, so we've realized when I was about 11, 12, so it was way too late. And then they said, look, you've got to live with that as long as you can. And then around 50 or 60, have a full hip replacement. But in the meantime, because you're way too young to have that surgery, just, do anything you can to prevent doing more harm. That meant that I could not go to a networking event or a concert and stand for hours. That was just impossible. I was in too much pain. So I had to find a stool or a wall to lean on, or anything really would do. And being extremely tired, and even pain at work on the standing, sitting at the computer for too long. So in Australia, I met a lot of friends and uni friends, and one of my best mates' dad was a doctor. And the philosophy between Australia and France is quite different. He said, look, we have seen your quality of life really diminishing over the last few years. I think it's time for you to really think about potentially the surgery. And that was one of the best decisions again I've made. I had the surgery. It took about 3 to 4 months of rehab. Because I was so young, they've decided that everything would take much longer. So someone in their 70s or 80s, they have a hip surgery. 2 days later, they're up from their bed, they make them walk, and they go to rehab, and that's it. Because I was so young, and normally you can have only about 2 hip replacements in your life, because then the bone doesn't work that well, and the hip doesn't really stick, so to speak. So the surgeon were really, really scared. So they really put me into a kind of bubble So I was on a wheelchair for 2 months. I was walking at time, but then back onto the wheelchair, not allowed long distances, not being around people in case I get knocked around. And that was really hard, extremely hard. I ended up flying back home, being in the south of France, in a small room of 8 square meters in rehab for over 21 days, not seeing anyone, not having internet. And that was really testing. But on the other side of that, having to relearn how to walk, manage stairs, and later on run again, which was very funny because I flew back to Sydney. And for the little story, I was going to the grocery and there was a traffic light and you hear the beep, 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 beep because you only have about 10 seconds left. And I didn't want to miss the light. So I started a little stride. And while I was in motion, having kind of faster pace, I realized I was actually doing something I've never done since the surgery. And it was such a weird experiment, feeling myself going faster and faster and having a little jog across the road 3 months post-surgery. So yeah, that was the story about learning how to walk again.
Oh, congratulations on doing that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, many people have really inspiring stories, but I think it's really about sticking out and doing your best every day. And sometimes you have to forget about the end goal. It's just about tomorrow and today, dealing it with one day at a time. So that's what I did in that instance.
Do you think that any of that adversity has helped you going forward?
100%, because at times I can actually draw upon it. So I do find myself sometimes, especially in business, running my own business now, still being in a growth phase and dealing with lockdown, not being able to, go into organization, having face-to-face and all that. I do remember those times like, well, it did work out in the end and you did it and it was hard. And is today as hard? Probably not. So I think, it's a mindset game and it does definitely help,
Good. Thank you for that. Some of the, let's say, topics that were recurring was personal leadership. Can you tell me what personal leadership means to you and what's the advice that you typically give on it?
For me, I think, great question, and thanks for asking, Thomas. We've lost our way around leadership, and leadership is used, at any source, as we say. And I believe that leadership, unfortunately, for most people in their role at the moment or today in 2021, is made of a continuity of little dots they've seen around their experience. They've just collected behaviors, sentences, action, reaction, and it's like we all have a perfect David from Michelangelo. So Michelangelo said the David was always there. I just had to carve out the pieces, the extra pieces, and then it appeared. But I think for leadership, actually what happened is the reverse. As a leader, as a child, usually we are perfect. We can, rally our friends around, whether it's a play on the playground or watching TV, whatever it may be, or a birthday, whatever it is. But I think as time goes by, we start looking at what we believe to be a role model. And we start just, keeping all this information. And we're slapping, as I said, layers on the genius David, on unique superpower we have as a leader. And those layers are usually full of shit because they're not ours. And a lot of them come from, previous era where it was, the stick and the carrots. And then there's, millions of different layers and type of leadership, which has been labeled depending the cultural background, the country you're in, or even the industry. But I believe there is way more power in one person realizing, stopping and going through their life, or what I call the life chapters, and realizing at every stage that was quite significant, who was a role model and was actually what served you in terms of the things you've collected from that role model and what hasn't in your interaction, in your work, in your well-being even. And I think it's more about, do I feel this to be right deep within me, or would I communicate this information differently? Would I love to be talked in a different way? Well, then why don't I do it? So there is a few questions to ask oneself, and those are the one that actually starts someone to do the work, or to entertain the fact that there could be perhaps a better way to show up, a better way to lead. Because now, as we've seen in the previous years, so many things have happened around the world. People are becoming more voiceful. People have displayed their disagreement with government, with law being passed. And you can see that this is going to get stronger and stronger. People are going to use their voice. And the leaders of yesterday that are playing the carrot and the stick and tyranny and fear and whatnot, they're actually going to find themselves really pressured in between what the board is asking of them in terms of result for the organization, and in between what the people want for them to be and how to show up as a leader. And they're going to feel really compressed, and they're no longer going to go to the next room. And they're going to actually being, pointed out and potentially asked by, the next room, which is the board or the stakeholders, to actually move aside, because they're no longer leading in the way that is serving the people, the organization, the client, and be in service. So yeah, that's a little bit about self-leadership for me.
If I understand correctly, one of the points you touched upon was, am I right in saying that you advocate some form of, it's sort of subjective, so you wouldn't necessarily prescribe one way of doing it, but it depends on you personally about how you would lead? Because lots of people I've spoken to, they like the idea of servant leadership, but again, it is one way of prescribing it. So what are your thoughts on those two conflicts, if you like?
I do believe information is power. And I do believe that the labeling is very useful when you don't know yourself. And when you need a rule book in order to go from A to B, then you can use any label you want, because if someone said, oh, you should be a servant leader, then it's very easy. I know exactly what I should be doing. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to do it necessarily well. And what would happen is a colleague of yours might use servant leadership with his team or part of his team and thrive, while you try to do it and it's not working. And that's where the magic is. That's what I work on, because it has nothing to do with the type of label you're trying to emulate. It's you. It's, cats and dogs meet each other, sniff each other. Humans, we don't sniff each other, but we can read people. And if someone is trying to use a label which is not who they truly are at their core, we can smell bullshit. And that comes in the way of the communication. So best is to really do the work on ourselves, to really discover what type of leadership is best for us. What do we believe in? What do we stand for? And then, yes, go and use a label as a tool in your toolbox in a specific, situational circumstances to help a message get across or lead truly. But I think the labels then takes you back to managing. So then you become a manager and you manage people through those labels, because it's one step removed from you. A leader, it's someone that lead and inspire and show the way and takes you to places you never dreamed of. And a leader, really, what's most important, I think, a leader doesn't take credit for the outcome. The outcome is actually, owned by the team. What a leader can get credit from is creating the environment for the team to thrive. And the leader, at the end of the day, should only create the environment for fertile ground and for people to become better. And if they do better, then the results are going to show up and the company is going to do better, and so on and so forth. But a leader that has a little bit of ego and that wants to own the result and is leading through that need to own the result will then create havoc or chaos at times on the way.
The quiz makes a lot more sense now, the leadership quiz, because you're helping people find out what kind of leader they either are or want to be, right?
Correct.
Cool. I like that. So in a lot of the, shall we say, profiles, plateau hacking is a recurring theme. So can you share what plateau hacking is? And one of the questions I really wanted to ask was, what are the typical plateaus that people face?
So the plateau hacker we've really struggled, there's another word, for about 2 years to pinpoint something that people can either be interested by or that people can get an understanding for what it may be. So the plateau hacker is someone, so it's me, and it's someone that takes you for where you are to the next level. And for me, it's about lifting organization, and more importantly, it's people. So wherever you're at, in order for you to find where you're at and to go to the next level, regardless of the level that is, we use that plateau hacking, because usually people do something, progress, and they just plateau. So we hack the plateau you're at so we can take you into the next step of your journey.
And in terms of the most frequent plateaus?
Well, it's usually one word, 3 letter, and it's the ego. People are, have that beautiful friend which can be helpful at times, but that's one of the plateau. But it could be anything. It could be a plateau in terms of accessing the next room into a male-dominated environment. And I have a lot of women I work with, and it's quite interesting because it becomes extremely powerful. Then you may have personal plateau in terms of the lenses. So the way in which people are seeing the world is usually, or can be, limiting to them, to their own growth. Because depending on your cultural background, depending where you grew up, depending on what you believe to be right or wrong, you're going to look at a certain situation or a conversation through your personal lens. And that may not be a very objective lens, and that may not be the lens you need at that time. So by removing that actually one plateau we can remove. So the whole work around the Plateau Hacker Academy is really about digging really deep, whether you're a leader or an entrepreneur or someone aspiring to grow because they feel that their business is plateauing. They're not getting anywhere, they're not getting any bigger for some reason, and they can't pinpoint it. But when we do all that work, then you realize, oh, okay, that makes way more sense now.
I am about, I want to say about 120 episodes in to my podcast, and the topic of ego has not come up once, unless I'm mistaken. What do you think about that?
It says a lot then of the people you have on the podcast. No, that jokes aside, but there's always a bit of truth in jokes. It is interesting. It is interesting. It's hard because people see egos as something really bad, and therefore it's a conversation which is not very few people are okay to have. For me, ego is not necessarily bad because it's a beautiful open door into your next level, into your next growth, and understanding yourself and others much, much better. And if we were just looking at it differently and in a way to understand and not just, push it away because it has all that stigma attached to it, people would do much better. And the world would be a much better place as well, let alone people.
So let's
What's
say
your thoughts?
It's actually interesting because I bought some books for my little ones, and they covered the topic of ego. So it's quite a recent one. And the main thing about ego is it kind of stops you. It comes back to that plateau that you mentioned. It stops you progressing. So you will miss problems because of your ego.
Yeah, it's like a fog. It's a fog. It's a filter, and it just stops you from seeing, feeling. Even some people lose their logic or rational just over ego, and we see it every day. And sometimes in a room, it starts very differently. And someone doesn't need to speak, but by just entering a room and sitting down, you would see people's ego start showing up. Who's going to come and try to be buddy up because they believe, for whatever reason they may be, how they're going to suss you out for the first part of the meeting. All that is really ego driven. But that's also linked to that carrot and sticks, the good and the bad, how you should behave, because we've seen and we've experienced for so many years and decades what leadership should look like, or what we made to believe to each and everyone around us what leadership was about. And who was behaving in such a way, ABC, was most likely to get the top job and go ahead. So then why not emulate the same? It's kind of, the cat is eating its own tail, and a bit of a manic situation, really, if you ask me, because if you stop, look at it for 10 seconds, you'll be like, oh God, that's a bit silly. We've been doing the same thing over and over.
Have you ever struggled with ego?
Myself, or with egos of others?
Well, both. Initially, I was asking about you.
Okay. Huge. I mean, what do you think? That guy 5 years ago that wanted to do more at work, that was never saying no to its own boss, that was taking bigger project with bigger team, and that wanted to show the whole world it was feasible. That was, I mean, my ego was huge in that sense, because there was nothing else than ego, feeding the monster, and showing me how deep that hole was that I had to fill in. So I could, measure up to something. So maybe whether my parents or else, but I could show the world I was worth something. So yeah, no, it was that was a lot of ego there, definitely, yeah.
Well, I know you did the work on it because of the way that you approach leadership now, or the kind of Oprah Winfrey inspiration there. But I don't know how. So what happened?
Well, it is quite interesting because it started with the first question was curiosity, and it was all around there has to be another way. There is no way that I'm early 30 and I've already done a lot. There's still a lot I want to achieve, and at that pace and rate, I can't keep collecting burnout basically. And so something has to give somehow. So curiosity started, and then people just, it's a little bit when they said, when the student is ready, the master will walk in. And it was a little bit of that. Everything just, I was ready for something different. I was ready to show up in a different way. And my friend recommended, as I said, mentioned, in Bali, this place and this place. And then in the meantime, I had applied for a postgrad professional program at Stanford, which was all around how to foster entrepreneurial mind in medium to large scale organization. And the day I resigned from my role and decided to look after myself and do a bit of the work, not really knowing what the next step would be, just trusting in the now, I received the admission letter from Stanford. So that meant that then I went to the US and actually spent 3 months driving before the course into all the beautiful national parks they have. And I did about 6 of them. And that was amazing, being in nature, having time, reading books. And that just, that was just the beginning. And then I did a lot of personal development, a lot of mentor, obviously then here, a lot of courses on ego and a lot of things. And I just made my own puzzle. The puzzle started appearing, which is my own. And the funny bit is I've translated that into a couple of courses that I have and that I help leaders with an organization. And it's interesting because everyone says it is so different. As you were saying before, how do you do the work? And it's but the results speak for themselves. So I'm pretty happy, and it's a never-ending journey. So I'm on the way.
Well, yeah, the curiosity principle that you mentioned, it makes me think of like, why am I the way that I am? And as soon as you start digging, you get to strange places, right? But one of the things that you help people with is finding your why. And the context is slightly different there. But I wanted to ask you about just that topic of finding your why, just because it is very popular, and I want to get your take on it.
It is very popular, and I used to lead with it for the past few years, and I stopped because it's not tangible enough for organization. And I think our society is not ready enough, and too many people, I'm going to make a lot of enemies, I think, right now, but a lot of agency and PR agency in particular thought, oh, that why could be a source of revenue. Let's just whiz something together that's really super commercial, empty as shit. But let's do it and offer it. So it's adding to the problem, because now a lot of organization and people think, oh, you have to have one. If you don't have one, you're no one. So it leads to individual being really depressed and sending themselves off crazy to find that personal why. And on the other side, you've got organization thinking, oh my God, it's going to cost me a mint through that PR organization, sending me something that everyone else, then it's like, well, doesn't really stick. So let's put it everywhere, on the walls, on books, on computers, because it's so meaningful that we can't remember it. So I know I'm being very cynical here, but that's unfortunately a big portion of what people are doing with the purpose bit. Now, the way I like to approach it and see it is it's in service. It's really extracting what you're the best at, what you being put on this earth for, most likely for individual, And if you really follow that thread and do the work and get there, then you're going to get to really good places. But in talking about me helping people, for example, in some of the courses for leaders and entrepreneurs, we don't start with that. And people have asked me the question, but I need to find my why. And I say to them, well, you tell me, you've got two options. Either you're the David covered in shit for 50 years of layers and try to find your why, led by your own ego, or we do the work and we get rid of all those layers, we get to the genius self of who you are, and then we do the work on finding what you were put on this earth for. Which one do you think is going to have way more meaning and you're going to really last, the journey? And that's what's interesting, because people want things right now. They want an easy fix, get rich quick scheme, but you need to do the work first. And for organization, it's really about being in service first, but also I bring a lot of different side of things. It's not just the top room. Yes, I want the top room and the leader, but I want the latest employee that's been hired as well, for example. And sometime I might have a couple of clients coming in and everyone's looking at each other in the room thinking, well, I'm the boss, I decide. I'm like, well, no, because you have your lens. And if you say one thing, let's hear from the client perspective, how they receive all those messages, how they perceive your brand, how they perceive your product, to get different perspective. So I start by really, shaking the bottle really, really hard, where everyone really cracks up open, and then we can put the pieces together for something that's truly meaningful. And then the results speak for themselves. An organization has, for example, grown last year 19%, and they're in the financial sector, serving, their members. They improve their cost per lead by 61%, which for them results in millions of dollars, because instead of trying to speak to everyone, they're speaking to the people they should be speaking to with a message that truly resonates, where people don't think, oh, again, another, I'm a number, a cog in the wheel. They just want me for my money. No, they just feel like, oh, that's different. That speaks to me. Won't speak to my neighbor, but that's okay. Doesn't need to. So that's the area or the field I love to play in when it comes to the why or the purpose.
You make a good point about the commercial nature of it. For me, when I heard it, I sort of interpreted it as it's a really good tool to use for perseverance, because initially I think it came from Nietzsche. So the quote, I think, was the man that knows why can bear any how. Something like that. And if you're going through something really tough and you have a good why, then it's going to help you to do better. But in the context of like a business that's been going for 10 years and is doing just fine, it might not be quite so relevant.
Exactly. But what's interesting is a lot of people, so I used to work a lot in brand and branding and customer experience. And a lot of people reached out just for that. And a particular organization has reduced their sales cycle from up to 12 weeks down to 7 days for most of their sales. And we're talking about $250,000 sale. They're just a franchise model. And interestingly is they were doing okay. They had a huge growth. But before heading into the rebrand, I said, look, it'll be good if we do a bit of a deeper work to see who you are, what you stand for, what really is your why, because that's going to then empower whoever is developing the brand to have an alignment from beginning to end. And when we finished day 2, a lot of the employees in the room, when they heard it from their founder, they were smack bang. They were like, wow, that is, now I know why I'll be turning up to work tomorrow. So it's adding another layer of commitment. It's really, people will self-select in an organization thinking, okay, I'm on the right seat here. I'm in the right train. I'm staying way longer and I'm going to give way more, because now suddenly my work has some meaning. Because you could be in a very successful organization, but people plateau again. I mean, look at Microsoft. By the mid-90s, they had reached their, they had a big wide purpose, but it was actually a big audacious hairy goal, which was to have a computer on every desk in the developed world. And that was done by the mid-90s. And since then, what did we have? Nothing. Just a lot of exec getting a lot of big paycheck, and Microsoft has not really, did anything revolutionary. They had great product, but it didn't stick like Apple for some reason. And interestingly, when Satya Nadella, which did an interview with us, it was amazing. He did say to us, he went back to the first iteration of the product when Microsoft was put together. And he said, I believe that if we go back to that, we will know why that first iteration was made. And it was in service of the first customer, which was, entrepreneurs and small businesses. So then, therefore, they relooked at everything, and then they started coming with the whole suite of product, which are serving small businesses with Teams and whatnot. And since, look at the trend on the share market since. It's been just amazing. But without that, I strongly believe the company would just have continued being okay, because everyone felt okay. But now they've reconnected with something much deeper, much way more meaningful that you can have fun with.
Well, you touched on brand, and I did see something from you, I think, which was misconceptions around what a brand is. It's like
oh yes,
I think it was like,
surface level.
You think people think that a brand is a logo essentially. So what does a brand mean to you?
For me, it's everything that sits below the surface. Before I see a logo and a color and a tagline, the brand is actually, part of the brand is the purpose. Part of the brand is the people behind. Part of the brand is the bigger reason why the company exists. Is that company going to be of contribution? All of that transpire in the brand. And when you have all those moving pieces, then you can go and what I call articulate the brand into some visual material. But don't start just by having something visual and try then to make sense with the rest. It doesn't work. So I think people, again, are very rushed, and they think, oh, it's like, if you look at the trend on social media, everything is on what look and feel like. Everything is on the image, the smoke and mirrors. You're going to do a 15-second TikTok that's going to go viral. So let's all try. Don't worry about the rest. Let's just try to get that, elusive success. So when it comes to your brand, people are like, okay, well, and the words that often come out is, oh, who do you think we should look like? Or what do you think we should look like to get the most client? And I said, wrong question. I actually don't care what you should look like. You should look like no one else. Otherwise, you're going to end up being a pale version of someone else in the market. You may as well just knock on the door, write them a check, either buy them over or join forces. Because why have two companies doing more of the same? It's not helping anyone. The product is not going to be better. You're just being greedy and surfing a wave. And we know what happened to wave when you surf. They crash sooner or later. And then you're going to have to paddle out again, find another idea and do the whole thing and the brand and all that. I said to my client, I want you to become a tsunami, a force to be reckoned with. And every single organization or individual I worked with over time, it does happen. And it's just amazing to see, because people are really happy. They develop, they grow, their lives change, work change, they collaborate, the way they collaborate. And that's way more meaningful to me personally than the previous work I was doing, which was just feeding the bottom line of the business. I still feed it today, but in a very different way.
Well, I'm running out of time here, Joris. I've got more stuff to cover than we've got time to do. So, but yeah, really good conversation.
Sharper. We should do another one maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But you mentioned the part of the brand is the people, and part of your skill set is improving employee engagement. And I think it's a neglected, perhaps important part of business. What are your thoughts?
Oh, 100%. If you want your business to go anywhere, employee engagement is one of the key metrics there, because if you want to do a simple exercise is empty your offices from its people and tell me how well your business is going to go. Full stop. So, when people come and argue around that, I'll just say, well, you tell me. Ask everyone to go to work and tell me how, the bottom line is going today or this quarter, and then we can have a conversation again. The happier the people you're going to have, the more connected to your shared meeting at work, well, the happier the family, so to speak, going to be. But then everyone's going to be willing to think outside the box, to move from order takers to creating their own destiny, so to speak. Innovation is going to flourish. All that is just going to be amplified. Every single area of the business is going to be amplified. It's like the extra 1% you add everywhere. But you have to start with the people. There's no point looking at the bottom line saying, I want more money here, and then just sit and wait and back orders. It's not going to happen.
And do you help companies with employee engagement?
100%. So the work I do really is around team alignment, performance, productivity, but we start with the people. So if the company has, a mission, vision, value, all that, it's good. But then we often translate it for a team. What does it mean at team level? I help team understand where is their place into the big puzzle of the company, and how do they interconnect with the other key pieces. And also about the fact that if you decide to show up, it's not just for a paycheck. You need to have a much bigger connection with the work you do every day and understand what that work is doing. So I work through multiple angles. I work from board to C-suite to then, middle management and teams. And we can work through all the layers of the organization when it comes to realigning people. And then the numbers, speak by themselves. I just got an email yesterday, actually, from another client where they said that the workload capacity had improved by 46%. And empowerment improved by 25%, meaning people feeling empowered, they can make decisions, a much better decision. And non-discretionary spend, which is quite funny or interesting, down 28%. But if you say that from the get-go, people will look at you and be like, oh, what did you do? Did you tell them to stop spending? No, we didn't even ask them to do that. That was a byproduct by them showing up, having a different connection and understanding what the company was trying to do. Simply.
I'm not asking for any secret sauce here, but what was the problem that you solved for them?
People mostly disconnected with the work. A lot of previous leaders which weren't of service of the team, and a team that was extremely stagnant, and a little bit of toxicity within the team and the organization. We just turn it around.
So that sounds a little bit like a rut. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely fair.
And in terms of having, I think it's quite a common thing for a business to have, a fair number of people who perhaps they were hired and leadership maybe wished that they didn't hire them. Have you got approaches to dealing with that type of scenario?
100%. For me, part of the work I do is always having extremely honest conversation. And we do a bit of there's a data approach and a personal approach. And the idea is either you term for a paycheck, how much of a fulfilled person you are, and what do you believe about the future. And between the three of that, at the end, we look at the numbers and we just decide, how many people should or shouldn't be in the room. And the conversation is easy. You're going to be a much happier and better person for yourself first, for your colleague and for your family, if you're in the right environment and in the right job. If this job is not for you, then you should seriously think about finding another one, because sooner or later, the conversation is going to have to happen. But you're free. No one's holding a gun to your head. You should truly be thriving to find a job where you're actually really happy to go to. So in turn, you have much better conversation and collaboration with your colleague. When you get home, you're not pissed off from the work and what happened during the day. You can show up as the better father, the better brother, the better mother. And then people really have a ha-ha moment. They really realize that when I go into organization, it's not about I've been given a mandate to raise the bottom line, so we're just going to go and do that, and anyone that doesn't fit the script is out. That's not how I go in. I go in to say, look, my wish is for you to be in the right seat, in the right job. And then when we have that, then let's look at, getting better in performance and so on and so forth, and how we can do that. But first and foremost, we need to have people that want to be there. And if they don't want to, I often tell them, I say, there's no point. You're wasting my time, you're wasting your time. I could be doing this work with other organizations that needs it more.
Yeah, I have an automatic tendency, I'm not sure why, to think of it like is always a negative thing. Whereas I have heard it once said that you're actually, in some instances, doing them a favor by
100%.
helping them find the next role that they actually would be happy in.
I give you something you can use. The conversation is often around, we need to free some people's future.
Great.
So it's not about sacking anyone. It's really about freeing the future, because if you have the wrong person in the wrong job, the future is going to be really dark and miserable.
Yeah, that's taking it one step further, isn't it? That's different than doing them a favor.
Yeah.
So, Joris, what are your goals?
Okay. My goal is to serve as many organizations that I need as possible, and people is to then divide my work into 3 areas in the coming years. Part of it, which large scale organization and organization in terms of United Nations perhaps, or European Union or some government, and then doing private work and then individual one-on-one work. So really trying to tap into different layers of society to share who have become, in the sense that, as you say, the secret sauce is working and people can really gain from it. And it's fun work. So I just want to try and explore those areas. So those are big goals because, especially currently with the pandemic worldwide, but hopefully soon we'll get there.
Wow, it's a great goal. I've not heard anyone say anything like that. So, yeah, impressive. Is there anything which would be valuable to the audience that you would like to share that I haven't asked you about today?
Well, the only thing is, if anything really tickled their curiosity or they found triggered or what else during that interview, just remember, whoever you are, wherever you are, it always starts and ends with you. I think that's a big key to keep working with. That can be quite useful in professional and personal.
No one's going to sweep in and help you achieve what you're trying to achieve, yeah?
That also, but instead of blaming others, usually we're the one that should be blamed, because you decide the situation you put yourself in, regardless of the outcome. And sometimes it's not something we want to hear, but that's why I say it starts and ends with you, because we decide to open our mouth, we decide to take a job, we decide to reply to an email, we decide to show up a certain way. No one is asking you to do so.
Great answer. I'm going to try and sneak one more of my questions in before I ask you.
Go on.
Peak performance. How is a generalized question, but how does one achieve peak performance, would you say?
So I think it's a bit of context for that. Peak performance for where you're at. Because peak performance for you and I, and peak performance for the athlete going to Tokyo currently, it's going to look very different. So I think it's very good to also understand where we at, and right now trying to reach that peak performance of where we at in our life. That's step number one. Otherwise, as we say early in the interview, people's going to injure themselves and not get anywhere, not really responsive, like the athlete training. So that is number one. But number two is also keep that curiosity. What could be? What else could that be doing, seeing, learning? And stay open to new ideas and entertain those new ideas. Stop to listen to reply very quickly, just listen to understand. And try to be very quiet in meetings sometimes, especially when you're a third party to a meeting. And even if you have a small part in it, just look how people react and the ideas that come on the table, and look at it through different angles. The angle of, oh, this won't work, it's shit, okay? And the reason why. And then the other angle, oh yeah, this actually could work. And it's interesting, you would see your mind starting to stretch, and the mind, once stretched, never regain its original forms. So that's probably one key on way to peak performance.
Would you say you're at peak performance at the moment?
Not at the moment, unfortunately. During COVID and lockdown, probably not. But with what I have, I'm happy. It's not peak, but it's not far off, and I'm happy for now, but I know I can do better. And the help of mentors and reaching out to people and having conversation is always helping. Because now that you've asked me that, I'm going to go again and reassess it all.
You say thanks for that, Thomas.
Thanks
for
Thomas.
That question.
Yes.
I'd say that you've hit peak performance in this episode, so thank you for that. Can you tell people where the best place to find you is?
So my name is Joris Cuesta, Joris, and Cuesta, Cuesta. So joriscuesta.com for my website, and then they can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out, add me, ask me any question. And if you want to follow a bit of behind the scene and clients and all that, there is Instagram as well, which is Joris_Cuesta.
Joris, thank you very much.
Pleasure.